Welcome to Abundance. You guessed it, a podcast dedicated to all things surrounding dance. I am Kristen.
And I am Hannah, and we are two best friends who are brought together by this art form.
Please join us in 5, 6, 7, 8.
Hello. Today is another day to talk about something called a mirror. Now, this is a tool that we use as dancers, and it is very beneficial, but also can have negative aspects to it as well. How are you doing today, Kristen?
I'm doing pretty well. It's such an interesting topic to bring up, and it's so relevant not only to dance, but just to our everyday lives. I think we don't actually realize how prevalent mirrors and our reflection really is present in our lives.
Yeah, I think they are a tool that almost everyone uses day to day, whether it be in the morning or at night or even in the bathroom. When you think about it, almost every bathroom has a mirror, whether that is in your own home or in a public place as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, if you remember, Hannah did a dance for camera back junior year at Mercyhurst with Kat as my dancer, and I titled the dance for camera Reflections. And it basically kind of was bringing light to how often we see our reflection throughout the day. So from you waking up to pretty much the end of the day or the progression of your day. And it was kind of fun. I played like a little game with myself in terms of trying to discover unique ways in which we do see our reflection throughout the day. So like you said, I utilized my bedroom mirror in the beginning of the film, and then the bathroom mirror, of course, because as you said, we all pretty much have mirrors in our homes. But then even as she was progressing throughout the day and she got into her car, we realized we actually have mirrors in our cars, and they're not meant for, viewing really our own reflection. They're meant to see other cars and to be able to drive safely, but we also can see our reflection in our mirrors. And I mean, we do have also the mirrors that pop down where, people sometimes do their makeup or whatever in the passenger seat or whatever they choose to use it for. And then I was even noticing as Kat and I walked around campus how there was a couple random mirrors in the hallways. And then obviously we made our way into the dance studio, tying things back to dance. And the dance studios are lined with mirrors. That's just what we're used to. And so it was a very interesting project, and I think it really opened my eyes in a lot of ways. It was just kind of a cool reflective piece. So if anyone is interested in watching that, if you have not already, you can watch Reflections on my YouTube channel, Kristen Faraklis Dance and Choreography. And that was filmed back in 2018, but I still think that it has a lot of relevancy to all of the same issues that we're dealing with today, such as body image, which was what I was trying to kind of portray, was body image and how we perceive ourselves as people, self-esteem, all of those kinds of things that all come back down to simply looking at our reflection in the mirror.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching that dance for camera because it is so relevant, as we're saying, to what we all deal with daily. Whether you are or aren't a dancer, you're still looking at yourself in a mirror. And I know I don't want to generalize this, but I know girls, especially and females, do have more body image and self esteem issues than our male counterparts do, just because of just who we are as females. Society has us viewed in this beautiful, perfect way that we all have to look like something. And I think that puts a lot of negative thoughts in our heads. And then when we look into a mirror, it's kind of distorted sometimes. And that can be something that is hard in the dance world because we're constantly like looking at our body image and seeing if our arm is out of place or our head or whatever it may be. And instead of just focusing on the dance or the choreography, you're too focused and up up in your head more than you are in the present moment in the dance. You're just focused on your image.
Yeah, and as dancers too, when you're in the studio all day, it does depend on kind of the environment you're dancing in and the genre, the type of work you're doing, but a lot of times we're in the studio too wearing tight fitting clothing, whether it be a leotard and tights or even just tight athletic wear, and that's what you're wearing in front of the mirror every day, which as we know, tight fitting clothing is a lot more revealing than, wearing a baggy t-shirt or sweatpants where you can kind of, I guess you could say, hide a little bit more underneath your clothing. And so it just puts a lot of pressure on people to, I don't even know if pressure is the right word, but it almost just seems unnatural and unhealthy to be looking at your reflection for that long every day. I mean, normal human beings don't do that? It's just such an interesting concept that we as dancers basically just live in that type of environment every day when, you know, the average individual, of course, encounters mirrors throughout their day, as we said, which is part of their daily routine and just being present in our lives everywhere. But it just seems so unnatural to be in an environment all day where that's just what you're surrounded by. That's what you're looking at. You're being criticized, or not always criticized, but you're being critiqued by teachers and by your peers and directors, but then also you have the mirror and the self-criticism or self-critique that comes with that as well. So it's just of a lot of judgment, I guess you could say.
Yeah, a lot of judgment. And I know me personally, from my own experiences, when you are just wearing tights and a leotard, as we had to do all 4 years at Mercyhurst, it wasn't until this year, I think, during these COVID times where they were more flexible on their dress code. But I just remember wearing the black leotard and pink tights every day and just staring at myself for multiple hours at a day. That can get really taxing. And while I believe it's a very good tool as far as correcting yourself and trying to learn from the teacher and from your peers by using the mirror as a tool, it's still just very harmful almost too. To I mean, from my personal experience, it was to me. I feel like I do better when I'm not like constantly staring at myself in the mirror. I don't know. What do you feel about that?
There's definitely pros and cons, I would say. I mean, I I personally do find myself using the mirror as a tool a lot, especially for years now. I've been working on my pelvic alignment in ballet and standing at a sidebar where I could view my pelvis in the mirror. That was a really helpful tool to get that type of visual feedback because we're all different learners too. So, you have kinesthetic learning, you have auditory learning, visual learning, all these different things. And so, for some people, they might not be visual learners, in which case they really might not need the mirror. And I would argue that I learn using a variety of kind of learning styles, and I think most people do, but I do find some visual feedback to be helpful, and especially during these COVID times where we're also not getting any tactile reinforcement. We're not in studios where teachers are making physical corrections on us. I do think it's helpful to some extent, although it depends on the individual. And like you said, Hannah, it's kind of a double-edged sword. And while there are positive benefits to it, there are also a lot of negative outcomes. And I think it's one of those things where you kind of have to weigh which one outweighs the other. And I don't know if there's necessarily the right answer to that. I don't know if maybe that is dependent on the dancer, whether it's a better thing for one dancer versus the other. And unfortunately, in the dance studio, you either have one or the other. You have mirrors or you don't. It's not like you can have a personal mirror for each and every dancer. So I think it comes back to a lot of, since every dancer is different, perhaps how the mirrors are being utilized in the specific dance environment and by the teachers or faculty. And one thing which I know some studios have, which I think would be wonderful, quite honestly, for every studio to have, would be curtains to cover the mirrors. So you have the ability to utilize the mirrors, but then you can also choose to cover them up. So whether you're preparing for a show and it's getting closer and you want your dancers to be less reliant on the mirrors, or whether it's just in the middle of class, your dancers are getting too stuck in the mirror, just having that ability to basically take that away. And I know that some teachers already will choose to utilize that by maybe having their dancers face the back of the room for exercises, or, flipping it for rehearsing a piece as it gets closer to a show. But I do think that curtains is something that's really nice to have. And I know that not every studio can have that, but I think that does help a little bit with the issues that can arise.
Yeah, definitely. I really like the points that you brought up because it is super helpful from time to time to have those mirrors, and especially right now during the Zoom environment, as you stated previously. I also think from a standpoint of just trying to pick up choreography and learning on your own, not having the mirror is helpful. So having those curtains, or even I was thinking when you were talking about how maybe universities or studios could implement using the curtain on like one day and then not using it on the other, and just flipping back and forth between using the mirror and not using it, so then you can get adjusted to both and see how you like it, like as you said, everyone's different, everyone has different preferences, but I think you could split it up where half the time you're using that visual and half the time you're not. But that's just my 2 cents on it.
No, I think that would be a really nice compromise, and I think that would make dancers more versatile too, because like you said, each dancer is different, and I feel like there's the classic, it's getting time for a show and the teacher says like, okay, now we're gonna flip and we're gonna face the back of the room, or something like that, and then you have those students that freak and they're like, no, even though that's inevitable because you're gonna end up going on stage where there's no mirrors. So I think it would get those dancers more comfortable with that, but then on the contrary, you also have, I feel like always there's a handful of students in the room who are like, "Thank you" to the teacher or rehearsal director when they say they're gonna flip the piece. So I think, everyone has different preferences, and getting people kind of okay and comfortable with both would be really great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And I just wanted to bring up, this is very interesting about the Duncan technique, because while I only have been in person with them very few times, what I do know and what I gleaned from those experiences is they don't use the mirrors at all in class, in technique class. Sometimes they'll face towards the mirror to check out alignment, or to try to get a visual sense of what's going on in their bodies, but generally the entire class is faced the other way, which is kind of cool.
That is interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Something interesting to learn. And
Yeah.
something too that does happen sometimes is, we advocate for students being their own, teacher in a way by self-correcting and utilizing the mirror. But at times too, students will get too stuck in the mirror. You sometimes that actually can, I think you briefly touched upon this, but like throw off their dancing, or it can mess up a line, especially I'm thinking about ballet specifically right now. Sometimes there's very specific épaulement, the direction of your head. And if your head, if you have your head kind of then tilted askew to be staring at your reflection in the mirror, that's breaking your line. That's breaking the aesthetic that you're going for. So sometimes depending on the step, if you're, and this can go in any style, modern, contemporary, if you're following through with your head and following your arms or your hands, then you might not realistically be able to look in the mirror, right? If you're doing some sort of release down where you're inverted, you just might simply not be able to look in the mirror. So we can't be too reliant on it. And I think it's important that we make sure our dancers aren't getting too stuck in the mirror either, because that will just inevitably throw off their dancing.
Yeah, also during the Zoom time too, I mean, I've had teachers when I'm taking my Duncan classes that say, "We don't use the mirror in person, so don't look at your screen," because again, it breaks the line. And also, I think this goes just for anyone when they're dancing. I think your body knows more than you think it does sometimes. So if you just trust yourself and get into the movement and into your technique and just trust that it will work out, and if if you mess up, you mess up, but then you're learning from a place inside of you instead of outside, if that makes any sense. Do you know what I'm saying, Kristen?
Yeah, it does make sense. And it ties back to you need that internal awareness, because when you do then have the mirror taken away from you, you need to be able to tap into that. If you haven't been working internally like that, when the mirror is taken away, it can be very disorienting. It can throw off your balance. It could just, the movement might just feel foreign to you. Yeah, I think it makes sense. And I think it's just an interesting too with right now us being over Zoom and having Zoom in a way be a form of a mirror, like you were saying. So many people who are utilizing Zoom are in their home spaces where they likely might not have a mirror. It's possible if they've got a really nice setup, they might have a little mirror for them to look. But I mean, for me personally, I'm still working over Zoom, but I am in the studio a lot of times. So I have the mirrors in the studio and then the reflection on Zoom. But for many people, if they don't have mirrors in their space, they might be using their Zoom screen. And like you were saying, Hannah, about it breaking the line and everything, I actually think back to when we first started things last year, and we were, what was it? Google Meets, was it that we used?
Oh,
Um,
Google Teams, wasn't it?
Google Teams, yeah. So we were, Mercyhurst was
Microsoft
not,
Teams. Microsoft Teams.
oh, Microsoft Teams, yeah. So Mercyhurst was not on board with Zoom yet, and we were using totally different platform. But anywho, I remember taking Leslie's class one day, and she corrected me about like my line was off in terms of my head placement. She gave me a correction of my épaulement, but the reason why it was off was because I was staring straight on at my reflection in Zoom, watching myself and correcting. And so while I had good intentions by what I was trying to do, inevitably I really was kind of corrupting what I should have been doing. So it's an interesting and tough kind of thing, because I'm sure that many students have good intentions when they are trying to look in the mirror and correct, but you know, it's not always for the best.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I concur. It's just a really interesting topic, which is, I mean, a main reason why we started talking about this today. Just because when you think of dance, I mean, I know for me personally, I think of a mirror, and I also think of performing, and I think of music, and I think of moving the body. But a mirror is a staple. And then you wonder, like, who came up with that? Like, I think about that sometimes. Like, who was the first person who decided this is what we're going to do for dance classes? You know?
Yeah, I have no clue, honestly. And, there's certain things that make sense that we have to have. You need to have the proper flooring for dance studios to make sure that people aren't getting injured. And there's certain things that are just very crucial. But I guess you could say a mirror is not crucial. It's like we said, it's a tool and it has some benefit, but do we really need it? Not really. We can do without it. I think this year has shown that we can do without it. It might feel weird. I think I've been in probably, I'm trying to think, only a handful of studios or maybe like black box theaters or the days where, you take a warm-up class or you take class on stage and it feels weird not having a mirror. I remember when we had a few classes on the pack stage at Mercyhurst, I feel like the first thing that always felt off to me was not having a mirror. So it's a strange feeling, but at the end of the day, we don't really need it.
What's interesting about that too is the Mercyhurst dancers now at school have been rotating classes in the pack. I don't know if you saw that, but
Mhm.
it would be interesting to talk to our friends and hear what their experiences were taking class almost every day on the pack stage. Like we only had it a few times, but I wonder how that is.
I could be wrong, but I actually think that they do have mirrors set up though for them on the pack.
Oh, do they? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you recall, but last year, a few times, I remember the day specifically that we were doing the senior photo,
Oh,
how there
that's
were
right.
those
You're right.
wheelie mirrors that were on stage. I'm pretty sure that they've been using those this year, but I could also be
Mhm.
totally wrong. So I
Yeah.
don't know. That would be something interesting to find out. But I think a lot of companies too will have company class depending on their accessibility. If they have access to the theater, I think a lot of companies do take advantage of having classes on the stage.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a very interesting thing when you think about it. I just, as we're talking, I'm just like, wow, all these thoughts are coming into my head about mirrors that I didn't even think about prior to this conversation, You can go deep.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think once you start to give some of these things thought as well, you'll start to notice just like how much we see our reflection in our day to day. Even sometimes on your computer screen or on your phone screen or a window when it's a certain level of darkness and you see your reflection, it's just our reflection is everywhere. It's kind of crazy.
It is, or even walking. I noticed when I was visiting you in the city on buildings, I could see my reflection so much. I don't notice that so much at home, but in big cities, because there's glass everywhere and there's a lot of reflection.
Yeah, that
Very,
is an interesting observation.
yeah,
I haven't thought about that one, but
yeah. So, is it a good time to take a break?
yeah, sounds great.
Here's a word from our sponsor.
So during our break, I had a little thought about mirroring in relationship to learning over Zoom. So, for those of you who have been working over Zoom, you probably realize that there's an option in the settings to select to have your video mirrored. However, in my personal experiences, I've learned that a lot of people don't use this setting and will choose to either just do things normally and maybe designate and say, okay, now right arm or left leg, whatever it is they're doing to designate which side they're using. Or they will say, I'm going to mirror you, and they'll do the left side while you do the right side. So you can follow along as if you were watching mirror reflection in a studio. And I think that this kind of all just goes to show how dependent we have become on learning material in the studio by watching through the mirror as opposed to watching the dancer. Because I personally find this really challenging, and it seems to me that a lot of my peers and even students I've been teaching this year find it challenging as well to learn off of Zoom if the material is not being mirrored. So if I'm trying to learn the right side of an exercise and the teacher is demonstrating with their right side and they did not select the mirror option on Zoom, I think at times it can be confusing and challenging. And maybe that's just me who's a little bit like directionally challenged and I don't know, maybe that's a personal problem or issue, but it seems to me to be more universal and perhaps an issue stemming from our dependency.
Oh, yeah, no, it's definitely not a personal thing because I've also dealt with that, and people I've talked to have been in the same boat. It definitely changes the way you have to think and how you're processing information. I think when something's not mirrored, it takes more of an effort because we're so used to just being in the same room as other people and learning from them directly. So Yeah, I find when I have a teacher teaching material saying, "Okay, I'm going to mirror you." So they're actually doing the opposite side as we're doing. So maybe they're doing left, we're doing right, but to me, it looks the same. And I find that to be less anxiety provoking almost. Like, don't you
I think
agree?
less brain involvement,
Yes,
honestly.
yes. Like you're doing less work to like think about it. You're just more
When
focused on
someone's doing the same side over Zoom, I think you just have to think a lot harder.
yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. And it becomes more taxing.
A trick I use personally, this might sound crazy, but maybe not. Maybe other people do this too. But when material is not being mirrored over Zoom, I like visually picture myself in like a projection and flip it. So that way I'm seeing myself almost transposed over the dancer, and then I can figure out, okay, that's their right arm. And then once I figure out, okay, this is their right side, this is what leg or arm they're using to begin with, then from there I can kind of take my transposed image of myself and then like bring it back to my body. And
Yeah.
maybe that sounds like I just took you through a weird trip, but that's what I do.
No, I mean, I do something similar. For me, it's like, okay, if I am the one like on their side, I think like if this is me and this is them, I need to turn my back to the camera. And then
Yes.
like
I yes, I can see you right now. Hannah's giving little hand signals of this and that, but obviously you all won't be able to see her visual demonstrations. But yes, I hear you, Hannah. I think everyone kind of maybe has a slightly different way of thinking about it, and whatever works for you is like to each their own. But I know one tool that I've learned as a teacher that's beneficial for students, especially younger students, but hey, it works for us too, is to put like a scrunchie or something to designate your right versus your left arm. So like a bright colored scrunchie or a watch on your right hand, so that way it's always clear to the students and point out to them at the beginning of class. Like don't obviously just wear something on your arm and not make note of it. That's not really that helpful then. But with younger students especially, having some sort of clear designation like that is beneficial, I've found.
oh, that's a great idea and tool. Did you learn that from your NYU classes or
Yeah, actually, a lot of my peers in the program, because we do teaching to each other. So we have a lot of projects where we have to teach a lesson plan or we have to teach a whole class or a little phrase or warm up. And we've also done teaching to public schools via Zoom. And I've noticed a lot of my peers utilizing the method of something like that on their arm, and that has just been for when they are teaching us. And so as adult learners, even I find that beneficial. And it's proven through personal experience and, just discussing with some of the other educators in my program that it works really well with children as well.
nice. That's a great tool. I hope to use that someday too if I'm ever teaching on Zoom or even just to young dancers, I think in person again, if you have something that designates your right from your left, I think in any kind of situation or space that you're in, it could be very beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Because with younger dancers too, at a certain age, you don't know right versus left. That's not something, a concept that they fully understand at a very young age when they might be just beginning to dance. And we learned through our ABT curriculum, the national training curriculum, that we shouldn't even use right and left with our youngest children. We should say, now to the wall or to the door, which, whatever's relevant in your space. And so that does make it a little bit more challenging right now over Zoom. And that's where, since you're not all in the same space and you can't say, oh, to the door or to the clock, you can say, like towards the right, or not, sorry, not the right, towards the red scrunchie or something, and then now towards the yellow scrunchie, having some sort of other way to differentiate.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. There's a few little pedagogy tips for you there today to kind of wrap things up.
Yeah, I like it. All right. Well, on that note, Do you have anything else you want to mention before we say goodbye?
I just think you all should just challenge yourself and just start being aware of your surroundings and where you see your reflection, where are there mirrors, and notice to like, how does that make you feel? If you feel so inclined, journal about it, do some reflection. If not, just some mental little notes or have a conversation with it about someone. I think that even to non-dancers, so while we've focused on dancers, it's just it pertains to everyone in society, and it's so interesting. And I do wonder if the experience is different for people in other countries outside the US. So, yeah, do a little reflection.
Yeah, I mean, people outside the US and even just from person to person, everyone might have a different experience. So I think journaling, as you said, and also, yeah, having those conversations, because I find that I learn so much from talking it out with other people.
Absolutely. All right, this has been some good reflection on reflection, Hannah.
Yes, it has. Loved reflecting with you, my friend.
All right, talk to you all soon.
Bye bye. Thanks for tuning in to Abundance. We appreciate your support. We hope to have PK'd your interest. Feel free to contact us at abundancepodcast5678@gmail.com and give us feedback on what you'd like to hear. That is abundance without parentheses. Go dance yourself silly. Bye for now.
A special thank you to Richard DiFiore for our lovely podcast tune and Matt Mellish for our cover art.